director of Causa Oregon, which is the Oregon Latino Immigrant Rights Organization. Thank you to Multnomah County Chair Office, Cogan, for finding us a room. I didn't, you know, my office in Salem, but it's so difficult to find a location to have a meeting here, and Guillermo Maciel, a great policy person at the chair's office, found us a room. So I said, great, and the best part is free. So appreciate that, Guillermo, appreciate that very, very much. You know, today, I'm reading a book now, and I was commenting with some people called and I know you are a big fan of Lyndon Johnson, in which I am. Yeah, that's weird. Latino immigrant fan of Lyndon Johnson. It's not a big fan, but I like to read about Johnson's saga, how masterful he was in the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives. You know, Robert Caro have wrote this in his fourth installment on Lyndon Johnson's life. It's called The Passage of Power, and talk about Lyndon Johnson, how he became the president, but how, you know, this great reader of men that knew how to read and thought he knew how to read everybody, you know, and he was a masterful politician. There was somebody that he couldn't read, and was John F. Kennedy. You know, and John F. Kennedy's birthday, of course, is today, for those who do not know. And the same day we celebrate John F. Kennedy's birthday, we celebrate our policy analyst's birthday, Robin Wright. So today is her birthday. You know, as I was mentioned, Lyndon Johnson couldn't read. This young man, Irish Catholic from Massachusetts. And he thought that he had to read very well. He did it. And you know, in our Latino community, many times, people from the left to the right, they think, oh, we have a reading on Latinos. Good luck. 450,000 of us from diverse countries all over Latin America. It's very difficult to have a single reading. So in our work that we do two types of ways of understanding our community. One is through the stories, important stories, but the other is through data. What are the stories and the data tell us about Latinos? But there was another reason. Last year at the Oregon legislative session, and the years before, my policy analyst and we always found these elected officials, and I want to recognize State Representative Lou Frederick here. And you know, and always he knows we find people that are, okay, where is the numbers? Where is the data? What are the contributions of these Latinos? And of course, we come with great stories, but then we decided that we need to confront not the rhetoric from every elected official, from the left or the right, not just with our great stories, but also about the important role of Latinos here in Oregon's economy. And what we did is we went to the mother of all data, the U.S. Census. And we also did some other things that we found out through that process. And as Kennedy surprised Lyndon Johnson, my policy analyst surprised me with her dedication and her work to put together a magnificent report that you will hear more about it. A graduate from Willamette University, 24-year-old today, is that right? And I met Robin there at Willamette University in 2008 in a class. And for some reason, at that liberation theology class, 2 days later, I received a phone call. And I knew in my heart that who was this person. And I met Robin, and she had been with us since 2008 as an intern, as a staff, and as a great person. And she had really helped us with the development of this report. So a lot is her credit for working very diligently on this report that she will share with you. I also want to acknowledge the Oregon School Employee Association here. They are in the process of reproducing 500 copies of this report. And the best part is that it's donated. So appreciate that. And that if you don't have a report and we don't have enough, you can sign up and we can mail it to you. There is going to be a page on our website that you can find more details about obtaining this report. We also hopefully that this report will be used for people in government, for people in foundations. I know I recognize some people from Oregon Community Foundation here, but also people that work and putting proposals together, even for foundations or groups, about what are the contributions of Latinos to Oregon's economy. And I want to move this within that note to our policy analyst, Robin Wright.
Thank you. And thank you, Francisco, for that lovely introduction. And I think something important that I'd like to add is we really see this report as an important first step in trying to kind of fill that hole or that vacuum of information that we have about Latinos or that we have about immigrants here in Oregon, Oregon-specific data. And so this is kind of our first attempt at doing that. I think there's a lot more that can be done and that hopefully in the years to come will be done. This is, I think, our conversation starter, but we want to keep talking about this and keep figuring out how we can really learn more about the folks who are living here. And so with that, this report looks at a couple of different sections of how Latinos contribute to Oregon. First of all, it looks in general about the Latino population in Oregon. How is the Latino population grown? Where? What does that look like? And then we look at Latinos as workers, entrepreneurs, and then contribution really to the state economy as consumers and as taxpayers. Pardon me, just always the requisite technical difficulties. There's a couple of things that I think really stood out in this report, and so we won't have the time. I'm sure you would all love to sit with me for 2 hours while we read through it point by point. I had to restrain myself from doing that, so hopefully we're effective at just looking at some of those really key things that came out of the report. So just briefly, a lot of you probably heard when that census data first came out last year, the Latino population has grown dramatically over the last 10 years. 63% growth in the Latino population since 2000, and that growth accounted for 43% of the total growth in Oregon, which is pretty huge. And Latinos now make up 12% of the population here in Oregon. And one of the things that I think through looking through the numbers, this report really saw is the shift in the population. And this is a shift in a lot of different ways. One of those shifts is in where we see growth in the Latino community. A lot of us are familiar with places that have kind of traditionally had a Latino or a Latino immigrant community, whether it's Woodburn, other places in the Willamette Valley, or out near Hermiston. But what we can see by looking at this map is those areas that have darker blue, those are the areas where we've seen higher levels of growth. You're seeing the coast, parts of the southern Willamette Valley, other places along the gorge, and then we can see here Deschutes County saw 172% growth in their Latino population over the last 10 years. Those are a lot of numbers, that's a lot of blue. What does this really, I think, mean for us? Is what it means is that a lot of other parts of Oregon are starting to reflect the diversity of our population. It's not something that's simply concentrated in parts of key areas. It's that all of Oregon is starting to reflect this diversity, which I think is really exciting and really interesting. And one of the things that I think is helpful for us to have in our minds just as we kind of enter into this conversation about Latinos and Latino immigrants, because this report looks at the community as a whole, whether it's folks who are born here, native to the United States, or folks who come here as immigrants, is that, as Francisco said, when we talk about Latinos, we have folks who are coming from a lot of different places. Yes, the large majority of people are coming from Mexico, over 80%, but we do have people here from Central America and South America. And so sometimes we're looking at data that really covers that whole community, and sometimes we'll be sharing information with you that's specifically about immigrants who have come from Mexico, because particularly when we look at the immigrant population here, again, the large majority are from Mexico, so while we don't want to conflate folks from Mexico with all Latinos, there are certainly a lot of correlations between the numbers, and they really influence kind of what data about the whole Latino community looks like. Just kind of want to establish that understanding here as we move forward. I think the biggest shift, though, when we talk about what did we really see in this report, was the shift in the Latino community from the growth being driven by newly arrived immigrants to the growth being driven by folks who are born here. We're seeing this nationally, and we're seeing it in Oregon. Fewer immigrants are coming to the U.S. and coming to Oregon from Mexico and parts of Central and South America. Migration for us here in Oregon really peaked during the 90s. It kind of continued to go up through the early 2000s, and since then, we've really seen a decline. In the 1990s alone, the Latino immigrant population tripled here in Oregon, which clearly brought about a lot of changes in the state, and I think it's left us with the impression that we're still seeing that rapid growth of the immigrant population, but that's simply not the case. Instead, what we're seeing is it's the native-born population that has driven this expansion in the Latino community here in Oregon. 75% of the growth in the Latino community was accounted for by the growth in the native population. And this is kind of being pushed by a couple of things. One of those things is that Oregon is a growing home for Latinos who are moving here from other parts of the US to settle here. A quarter of Latinos were born in another state and chose to move to Oregon and make their home here. And what that means is that right now, over 60% of Latinos were born here in the US, and we have 39% who came here from Mexico, Central America, or South America. And within that 39%, if you broke that down, you would see that of that 33% have not become naturalized, 6% have, so total 67% of Latinos in Oregon are either native-born citizens or they're naturalized citizens. And I think that's maybe a different picture than what we often think about when we talk about Latinos or Latino immigrants, or sometimes we put the two together and assume that most Latinos here in Oregon are in fact immigrants and are recently arrived. And instead, what the numbers really show is that Oregon is going through a change, that there are less immigrants coming. Really, immigration is almost at net zero right now. The folks who are immigrants have been here for a while and are staying here, and that the majority of the population is now native-born. And I think that's something that will really requires a shift in our thinking about what kind of policies we're making for folks here in Oregon now, and for the future success of Oregon. We need to be keeping these numbers in mind, and not the attitude of we are seeing increasing levels of immigration continuing on through this decade. It's simply not the case, and I think this report really shows that. The other aspect that's really driven the growth in the Latino community is youth, young adults. Currently, nearly 1 in 4 children in Oregon under the age of 5 are Latino, which means if we look out about 20 years from now, perhaps about a quarter of the population is going to be Latino. And so we still have a lot of changes to come. And right now, what that means, a lot of changes in our schools. We have a lot more Latino kids in our schools. It means changes in our ELL programs. 9% of all children in Oregon are Spanish-speaking ELL students. So all of these things, I think we don't have the time to really delve into them, but we see as kind of important indicators about where we are now and what kind of policies we need to make sure that these kids succeed, because that's going to be a big part of what will make Oregon succeed. And interestingly, in Oregon, approximately 1 in 5 children who are born here have a parent who is an immigrant. Those are not all going to be folks from Latin America, but again, they are a majority of immigrants here in Oregon. So what that tells us is we can't just have policies that focus on those kids who are in school, almost all of them who are native-born citizens of the US. We have to have policies that make sure their parents are successful, that make sure their aunts and uncles and their grandparents who are here, who might be immigrants, are also successful, because as we've learned, in order to have your children be successful, you have to have parents who are able to access jobs, access safe housing, access healthcare. And so I think that number, thinking that 1 in 5 of our children will have a parent who came here as an immigrant, is also a very, I think, striking thing, and a thing we want to keep in mind when we're thinking about policies that will help us succeed as a state. Finally, people always want to know, so we'll have a bit about undocumented immigrant population in Oregon. It's small. It's always been small. It's still small. Clearly still a significant part of our population, though. Right now, the Pew Hispanic Center estimates that we have about 160,000 undocumented immigrants in Oregon, and up to about 75% of those folks are going to be coming from Mexico. So they are the majority of our undocumented population. So that's just a little bit about kind of where we are and where are we going when we're looking at the Latino population and the Latino immigrant population here in Oregon. Latinos in the workforce, I think we have over Over 200,000 Latinos working in Oregon, representing 10.5% of the workforce, really a significant presence in our workforce here in Oregon at this point, and a growing presence I think we'll see over the next decade. One of the significant things that I think this shows is, like Francisco mentioned, sometimes we have an idea in our mind about where we might find Latinos or particularly immigrant workers working. Traditional sectors which are still represented here, whether it's service occupations, hospitality, food service, natural resources, which is farming and forestry, those are clearly still dominant occupations. About 50% of Latinos are still working in those occupations. But I think the significant parts are these other slices of the pie. When you realize that the other 50% of Latinos are working in office occupations, business, management. And so what this report shows us is really, just as we see Latinos kind of expanding out into all different parts of Oregon, we're also seeing all those different occupations truly start to represent the diversity of our population here in Oregon. Latinos are not just working in farming. They're not just working at service occupations. They are everywhere here in Oregon. And I think we'll start to see that pie look even more different over the next 10 years. That being said, Latinos still are more concentrated in certain industries. We have in service occupations, farming, fishing, forestry, construction, and production transportation. We all, as you can see, those yellow bars are Latino and the other ones are non-Hispanic or Latino workers in Oregon. So there is clearly still a difference that we're seeing in terms of where the Latino workforce is concentrated compared to the other population in Oregon. And what that means then is in certain occupations, Latinos really make up a significant part of that workforce, as you see up there. Almost 60% of agriculture workers are Latino. You have almost 30% in building and grounds cleaning, 23% in material moving, 20% in food prep and serving, 16% in construction. And this isn't just numbers to kind of serve to reinforce maybe your perceptions about where Latinos are working, but saying these folks are playing a crucial role in these occupations and in these industries, and therefore in our economy here in Oregon. These industries wouldn't be functioning if you lost close to 60% of your workforce in a day. And so I think to me, these numbers really speak to how clearly integrated and integral Latinos are to our economy here in Oregon. Looking briefly at Latino immigrant workers who have a slightly different employment profile, still tend to be concentrated in the same occupations as Latinos, but as you can see, they have even higher levels of participation in those service occupations, farming occupations, and kind of production and material moving occupations. And we have about 124,000 Latino immigrants currently in the workforce, representing 6.3% of all our workers here in Oregon. Again, wanting to recognize that diversity that actually exists within the Latino immigrant community, there are significant differences between Latinos who are coming from different regions. So for example, folks coming from Central America are much more likely to work in sales and office occupations and production, transportation, and moving occupations. Whereas conversely, folks who have come here from South America have dramatically higher levels of participation in management, business, science, and arts. There are about 40% of our immigrants from South America are working there. And a good 20% are in sales and office occupations. And so again, wanting to maintain the recognition of that diversity, that while we can paint a general picture, kind of the closer look we look in, the more that we see there really is a broad variety of experiences even within Latino immigrant workers. And something else that I think we really seek to highlight here is that when you look at those graphs, when you see that there are differences in the kind of occupations and industries that people work in, immigrant workers are complementing folks who are born here rather than competing with them. Immigrant workers tend to bring a unique set of skills and work experiences, and often sometimes have particular barriers that mean that they're not really working in the same specific jobs that native-born workers are. For example, here in Oregon, close to 70% of immigrants from Latin America are limited English proficient, and about 60% arrive in Oregon without having graduated high school. And this is really to say that, again, the combination of particular barriers, whether it's about language or education, and bringing a different skill set means that we're really seeing complementary skills and experience rather than competitive. Studies have shown that immigrants actually positively impact the wages of most U.S. workers. About 90% of U.S. workers over the last 20 years have seen their wages increase due to the presence of immigrant workers here in our country. And that because immigrants from similar regions are likely to arrive with more similar sets of skills, immigrants are actually most likely to simply compete with other immigrants for jobs rather than to compete with American workers. And I think we highlight this point because, as Francisco said, we've often encountered a lot of conflicting and competing conversations about what are the benefits of having immigrant workers here, and so we want to make sure that we integrate that into our conversation and understanding of immigrant workers here in Oregon. Again, we do have an undocumented workforce here in Oregon. It's about 5.3% of the workforce, so it's a very small percentage of our workforce. Numbers on a national level show us that even more so than other groups, undocumented immigrants tend to be highly concentrated and overrepresented in certain specific occupations that you can see listed up here. And a lot of them, again, are in things like maintenance, they're in different kinds of construction occupations, and food service occupations. And we can be fairly confident that we're gonna see a similar pattern here in our state. Undocumented immigrants are therefore really employed in industries that are contributing to the state's GDP. We have, again, those industries that tend to have higher concentrations of undocumented workers, like agriculture, construction, food services, and all those, and we can see making significant contribution to our GDP here in Oregon. And one of the things we found looking at this is that Oregon really stands to lose. If we lose our immigrant workers, if we lose our undocumented workers, we all lose. If undocumented immigrants were to leave Oregon, local business owners could see income reduced by as much as 7.4%. Employment numbers could go down as much as 6.5%, and again, reduced economic output. We've seen this lesson being learned in places like Alabama and Georgia, where they've enacted kind of strict anti-immigrant laws. A study done found that cities that enacted anti-immigrant employment laws had lower levels of employment slightly than what they would have had if they hadn't, and compared to cities that had enacted neutral laws regarding immigrants, or even more positive laws that work towards integration. And so really the lesson learned here is, I think when we think about complementary versus competitive, when you lose those complementary workers, that's something that hurts all of us. And finally, something that I think this report really shows is that Latino workers are key to the future of Oregon. They're working in some of the fastest growing occupations here in Oregon: service sector, construction, extraction, all looking to add around 20% more jobs in the next 10 years, and those are the occupations that Latinos are working in. We also see that Latino workers, especially women workers, immigrant workers, are at the forefront of providing health care for our aging workforce in the form of home health aides. 16% of home care workers are Latino, 24% are immigrant, and as you can see, the number of home health aides is expected to grow by 70%. And so not only are Latinos helping us replace our baby boomer workforce as they move towards retirement, they're also helping to care for them. And so I think this kind of just paints a very important picture about how truly integrated Latinos are to this workforce, and what a big role they'll be playing the next 10 to 20 years here in Oregon. Latinos as entrepreneurs, this is really probably one of the most exciting things I found when looking at the report. That the number of businesses owned by Latino business owners grew 78% between 2002 and 2007. And 2007 is our most recent data that we have about business owners. We'll have another one coming out. They're doing one this year, so hopefully we'll see even more exciting numbers when we're done with that in the next year. But that is a staggering rate of growth. And Oregon was among the top 10 states in the nation. Oregon was number 6 for the amount of growth seen in businesses owned by Latinos, which which really means that we're seeing Latino entrepreneurship really blossom all around the country, but Oregon is at the leading edge of that trend. And as you can see here, the rate of growth in businesses in Oregon by race and ethnicity. Here we have Hispanic and also Black or African American business owners really leading that and far outpacing the growth of the kind of total growth in businesses in Oregon. And I think this is a very, very exciting opportunity for Oregon. And just a little bit about what do these Latino business owners look like? What are their businesses like? The majority of Latinos own small businesses, and over 40% of them have between 1 and 4 employees. A lot of them are kind of micro enterprises, folks who might have no employees, no paid employees. And Hispanic businesses have employed about 14,000 people in 2007. I think we'll see bigger numbers when we get that new data rolling out. And I think this is a particularly striking, graph here that's coming at us from a national level, which shows the entrepreneurial activity, which means kind of the rate at which folks choose to open a business or start a business. And here we see that's the Latino community. And I think you really see that kind of incredible uptick in growth reflected here in Oregon. We're also seeing receipts from the Latino businesses grow. Record year in 2007, over 1.6 billion in receipts. And I think something that's also particularly interesting and important for us to remember is, again, maybe sometimes coming with the perception that the majority of Latino businesses, or particularly those owned by immigrants, are specifically just catering to their community, their immigrant community, their Latino community. And yet what numbers show us, especially when we look at a national level, is although, yes, a majority of Latino-owned businesses are doing business in Spanish, they're also doing business in English. 90% of folks are doing business in English. And so what that really means is that these Latino-owned businesses are providing goods and services for everyone in the community. And I think that's a pretty striking fact. And really briefly, we can see Latino-owned businesses are really in every industry. We do have some similar trends that industries like construction, manufacturing, waste management, and social services, which are also industries that have high levels of Latino employment, also have higher levels of business creation and growth. And really just a final graph, y'all can pore over these with more time, but I think it's pretty incredible when you look at the amount of growth for individual industries here in Oregon. You see the growth in Hispanic-owned businesses far outpacing businesses owned by other races and ethnicities, except for in manufacturing, educational services, and information. But other than that, those bright yellow bars I think are pretty exciting. And for us, this isn't just a moment to say, wow, isn't this great? But really, this is an opportunity for Oregon. In the report, we talk a little bit more about some of the barriers that Latino business owners face, particularly immigrant business owners who might be less familiar with the certain regulations and rules that are required to own a business here in the state of Oregon, or may have language barriers that prevent them from accessing as much information about financial services, that we think we have the potential to see more growth, especially if we're providing targeted assistance to some of those business owners. And so I think that growth was something really incredible when we're talking about the contributions of Latinos to the state of Oregon. Finally, we looked at Latino contributions to the state economy kind of more generally, and understanding the growing power of the Latino consumer force here in Oregon. In 2009, Latinos had a buying power of over $7 billion. And what we see on a local level is, I think, that really Latino customers have helped fuel the growth of Latino-owned small businesses, which is something that as you get more money flowing into the economy, that's something that helps everyone out. And you have here kind of a chart of, these are some of the areas that saw really strong growth in the Latino community over the last 10 years, and there are also areas that, as you can see, had very strong growth in the number of newly opened Latino-owned businesses Medford, for example, almost 200% growth in Medford of Latino-owned businesses. And so I think what this really tells us is that when you're talking about the Latino community, including Latino immigrants, these are folks who are coming here, they are staying here, and they are setting down roots, they are opening businesses, and they are helping support kind of the main street and the local businesses in the area, which I think here in Oregon we all really appreciate. And one of the areas that, again, we've seen kind of really striking developments is in home ownership. And perhaps some of you may have even seen this, I think, in the newspaper a couple of months ago, that Latino home ownership actually increased over the last 10 years, even through that recession, while home ownership rates for other groups in Oregon fell. And the number of Latinos owning homes in Oregon grew 87% over the last 10 years. There is still lower rates of home ownership for Latinos than for other folks in Oregon. You can kind of see that here. But I think we're really seeing a growth that will likely continue. We also see similar numbers even when we look at immigrants. Almost 40% of Latino immigrants own a home in Oregon. And I think, again, not only is that an incredible investment of their lives here, it is a statement that people are here to stay and here to build their families. They want to own homes. And something when you look at surveys done nationally is that home ownership is something particularly important. When Latino immigrants and Latinos are asked, home ownership is seen as a very important part of expressing your American citizenship and of reaching financial stability here. And so I think for us here in Oregon, again, that's a very positive sign and a trend that we'll want to support. We talk about it in the report and don't have a lot of time here, but again, Latino homeowners often face particular barriers, whether it comes to proving credit history or proving your income or having had access to a bank account or accessing more non-traditional financing options. And so all of those things, I think, serve to keep that number a little lower, and they're things that we'd be excited about talking about. How can we help address that so that we can assist more folks in accessing that home? And really quickly, what we see here is, again, that the longer folks stay, the more likely they are to own a home. And here in Oregon, the majority of immigrants really arrived in the last 15 to 20 years. So that means that really now is the time, and in the next 10 years, I think we'll see even increased home ownership as immigrants who came here in the 90s are really able to settle down and make that step. We also looked briefly about taxes paid by Latinos. When you look at other states and municipalities around the country, studies have consistently found that Latinos are essentially net contributors, which means that they end up paying more to the local kind of tax base and contributing to the local tax revenue more than they draw in services. We don't currently have a calculation for that here in Oregon. It's actually really quite a complex game to play when you find trying to parse out exactly how much money people are contributing and what you consider a service and how much money they're actually using. And so it's not something we really wanted to wade into at this time. But we do have some great numbers thanks to our partners at the Oregon Center for Public Policy about the taxes paid by undocumented immigrants. And I think, again, this gets to the heart of that conversation that people like to have about what kind of contributions are immigrants making to our state. I think this really speaks to that. Yes, Latinos pay taxes, yes, immigrants pay taxes, and yes, undocumented immigrants pay taxes. Up to over $3 million in state and federal taxes paid by workers, and up to an additional $243 million paid by employers on behalf of those workers. You see $136 million in state and local income, excise and property taxes, which means that's all money that's staying here in Oregon, and up to $140 million in Social Security, $33 million in Medicare. And really, again, this is understanding that undocumented immigrants are here, they're workers, they're consumers, they might own homes, they own cars, which means that they're having all of these interactions that lead to them paying plenty of taxes. And I think that's another important point for us to keep in mind when we're talking about the contributions here. And in recognizing that anyone who's taking a part in our economy is making a It's been a whirlwind tour of the report. I'll look forward to talking more in detail with any of you. Encourage you to really take some time to look it over. I wish I could have had all the graphs up here. I have a lot of fun with it, but I know not everyone does. And so our final section really just looks at a couple of policies that we would consider drivers of prosperity, things that will help remove some of those barriers currently facing the Latino community and really help improve the success of not just Latinos, but of Oregon. And so briefly, we have allocation of state funding or support for naturalization efforts. There's a little bit more about that in the report, but naturalization has repeatedly been shown to help increase employment opportunities, increase income, increase access to key services, healthcare, and it's been shown that naturalization drives and programs that really help people walk through the application process, help them take classes to prepare for the test, help them find funding to pay for the application. These things actually do really increase the rate of naturalization that we can see. They make a big difference, and I think it's something that will really make a big difference to the immigrant community here in Oregon. Second of all, we have driver's license restoration, which might seem to be something fairly removed from our conversation about economy, contributions, but what we found and what we probably all know very well is that to be someone who has a job, someone who needs to go to the store, somebody who needs to drive their kids to school, we need a car. Folks need a car, and so restoring access to driver's license for all residents in Oregon will really help ensure that everyone here, no matter whether they're born here, whether they come here, whatever their status is, they can be safely licensed and insured, and we can be using their car to get to work and get to school and do all of those really important things. Third, we probably start to sound like a broken record at this point, but state advocacy for federal immigration reform. We still don't have it, we still need it. A lot of the barriers that are talked about in this report are things that unfortunately we simply cannot solve at a state level. We cannot address some of the deep underlying issues about the flaws in our immigration policy that leave us with undocumented immigrants who lived here for 20 years and still can't take the step towards being legalized, that leave us with some of these difficulties that we see. And so we really encourage folks, no matter where you're coming from, community organizations, business leaders, elected officials, whoever you be, to take an active participation and voice in the conversation we're having at a federal level about immigration reform. And finally, working to try and identify ways that we can support the business creation and entrepreneurship of immigrants, and which means creating programs that really help target folks who might have difficulty accessing information because of language barriers, making sure that we're reaching out in Spanish or in indigenous languages and doing that outreach that people really need, making sure that we're then providing the information in the appropriate language about all those different licenses you have to apply for, all those different things. And so doing things to make sure that we're giving Latinos and immigrant business owners a helping hand up so that they can continue to grow and be successful here in Oregon. I think that's it for now. We'd love to welcome folks. If you have questions or comments, Francisco and I are both available. So I think we open it up.